Okay, go for it.
Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, folks, wherever you are. It's V, and I'm live with my man, Harley Schlanger. And guys, he needs no introduction. He is a voice of reason in this tumultuous world with so much confusion, with so called journalists going dumpster diving these days. Harley's the man that makes sense of it all. Without further ado, Harley, how are you?
I'm staying out of dumpsters, that's for sure. I'm afraid I'll run into
Absolutely.
a journalist.
Say again?
I said I'm afraid I'll run into a journalist if I dive into a
You
dumpster.
might. It might be a CNN CNN journalists are taking over dumpsters in a neighborhood near you these days, looking for Russian connections. You know?
Or else they're looking for FBI agents undercover.
Yeah, as trash bags. Harley, where do you want to begin? So many things are going on. You're with our friend Sean and over at SGT Report. Great interview. For those who have not gotten a chance to see Harley's interview over at SGT Report, check it out, sgtreport.com, as well as SGT Report's YouTube channel. Our friend Sean has a great interview with Harley. Harley really spells it out. So I urge all of you to go check out Harley's interview over there. So, Harley, what's going on, buddy? What's new?
Well, it was your life depends on stopping this coup. And we saw an event last weekend in Munich, in Germany, the Munich Security Conference, where you had one speaker after another talk about how Russia is an adversary, Russia is threatening the United States,
Yep.
Russia's developing low threshold nuclear weapons that means it's more likely to be used. That's actually what the US is doing under the new nuclear posture review.
Yeah.
They also started or continued the thread of China is intervening in the West and subverting democracy by building bridges, roads, and railroads.
Yeah. It's can you imagine? How dare they subvert democracy by developing these countries? They should be bombing them. That's how you spread democracy, Harley.
Oh, absolutely. And that's also how you spread a lot of money to people who do the bombing and the so-called reconstruction.
Yeah.
So the at the Munich Security Conference, there were two things that stood out. One was the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, who gave a very powerful speech about the increased danger of war because of and he said the Obama era policies. And he said that we need to have a new security dialogue that includes open, honest discussion. And
Mm-hmm.
a Chinese representative from the People's Congress went through just what we were talking about. How absurd is it that a country that lifts 800 million people out of poverty is accused of human rights violations and is accused of using their economic power to subvert other countries? And so you had on display the two extremes, the new paradigm, which is the China model, the Russian call for cooperation to fight terrorism. And then McMaster came out and was very brutal about Russia. And Trump had to tweet that McMaster is not speaking for him.
Right.
So that's how extreme the thing is from the US side.
I mean, what about Mattis? Mattis was recently over at some confab somewhere talking about the New Silk Road and saying that globalization does not mean one country gets to dictate everything to the rest of the world. Taking
I
shots at
think,
China, it's
yeah, I
ridiculous.
know, but that's been the US policy or the US, the Anglo American policy is
Right,
we've got the power, so we're setting the agenda.
right,
And that's not going to
exactly.
work anymore because
No,
we don't really have the power. There was a report from the Bundestag the other day, the German parliament, about the German military preparedness. They have 5 submarines, none of which are seaworthy.
yep,
So
yep,
the idea that you're going to build a European Union defense community that's going to deter Russia
yes,
is an absurd fantasy.
it is.
On the other hand, you may need that soon because yesterday Poroshenko,
Oh
the
God,
oligarch who's the president of Ukraine. And by the way, at the Munich Security Conference, Poroshenko said Russia's threatening Ukraine every day, threatening Ukrainian lives, uh, shutting down dissent. Now, the parliament in Ukraine passed a resolution calling for reintegrating the Donbass and Luhansk regions,
yeah, it's not gonna work.
militarily if necessary, they say. Now, The way this was passed was that the same neo-Nazi thugs who roamed the halls of the parliament to
Mm.
force Yanukovych into beating a hasty retreat to Russia, they were in the parliament again and terrorized parliamentarians to vote for this bill. Now, the problem is, now that Poroshenko said that's Ukraine's official policy, if they move troops into eastern Ukraine, what will Russia do?
They will lay down the hammer and end that whole debacle in less than 2 minutes because the Ukrainian army is so pathetically weak. They could barely do anything except maybe capture a foxhole before the rebels in Donbass wipes the floor with them. If they go with a full press, Russia will end that overnight.
And here's the point. Why would the Ukrainians be so suicidal to do that? And
They're
it's
being pushed.
obvious. Will
Say again,
be,
Harley?
yeah.
What did you say?
I said the Ukrainians are basically being told that there's fear in Europe that among the oligarchs
Yeah.
that the Russians will appeal to the industrial groups, the small and medium enterprises, and end the sanctions.
Yeah.
So they want to create a context, a classic false flag, to
Right.
lure Russia into some kind of firefight, sacrifice their own soldiers for the purpose of provoking an east-west higher level of confrontation.
And
So,
this again is another deep state antics. I mean, there's nothing to be gained out of this. This hyperventilation that I'm seeing amongst the Western politicians about this whole Russia hysteria, baseless hysteria. These fools, these idiots who couldn't fight their way out of a wet paper bag, Harley. These guys are willing to provoke nuclear war and nuclear annihilation just so they can score political brownie points. It's disgusting.
well, it's insanity. And geopolitics is an insane doctrine which starts with the idea that the game and either you win or you lose. And if you want to win, you have to bugger the other guy.
Yep.
And that's the essence of the thinking of the neocons, the Hillary Clinton crowd, the Bush crowd, and including the neocons around President Trump.
Yeah.
Now, the real issue here is at what point is their game stopped, or do we have a mistake that leads to nuclear war? The former chief German official from the Bundeswehr, the European Commission, General Kuyat, who's now retired, gave a very passionate plea on German television last night where he said the United States and Russia must talk. This nonsense must stop because if it doesn't, at some point there will be a mistake and nuclear missiles will start flying, and then there's no humanity left.
Right.
And that's the game that the neocons are willing to risk. Because they look, the other thing that's behind it is the collapse of the financial system.
Yeah.
More pieces falling apart in the United Kingdom, more layoffs of giant conglomerations. You have the in the United States, there was a report put out by Wall Street on Parade yesterday. I don't know if you saw it. It was very interesting. They report that since Dodd-Frank was passed, supposedly put a ceiling on derivative transactions. Derivative transactions have exploded. They've gone through the roof.
Yeah.
That you have banks are continuing to trade financial instruments that they know are completely worthless.
Correct. Because there's no liquidity. There's no solvency. That's why all this thing happens.
Yeah, there's still liquidity. There's no solvency. You're right about that.
Right.
But how do you take an insolvent piece of paper and make money on it? You sell it to a bigger sucker.
Yep.
And that's what's called the great robust recovery in the West.
Mm-hmm. It's a wreck covered up. That's what it is. It's not a recovery. It's a wreck covered up.
Well, this is the Obama policy was to have the low interest rates, zero interest rates, credit going to the banks, banks making loans to their at no interest to their corporate blue chip customers who then buy their own stock.
Right.
And I saw a report, I think it was Cisco Systems, that with the new tax law was able to bring back a large sum of money, to repatriate a large sum of money uh, from to they no longer have to worry about taxes on it. And 80% of the money they brought back, and it was billions of dollars, went into purchasing their own stock.
Jeez. Pump and dump.
So
Unreal.
we're now told, oh, the volatility was a momentary factor. Maybe it was program trading, but everything's really fine. And so, this is what they're saying is the solution. That things are still going because people are still buying.
Mm-hmm. It's scary to see this whole entire thing, Harley. Now we've seen some things ratchet up also in the Middle East. What's your take on that? And also, we have China set to launch their petro yuan gold standard late March, and so these are momentous events, and the U.S. is doing nothing but just rattling sabers, sitting on the sidelines, and making a muck of things, so to speak.
Well, this is the old Obama policy that's still being carried out by the CIA, by contractors, and some sectors of the U.S. military. Some of the military has been assigned the role of finishing off ISIS.
Yeah.
So they're continuing what they were doing previously, working with the so called Syrian rebels. And what keeps happening is that arms, therefore, get into the hands of the Kurdish networks that are considered by the Turks to be terrorists,
Yep.
as well as getting into the hands of Al Qaeda and ISIS. Now, is that the intention of the military people? I'm not sure, but it is the intention of the CIA. It is the intention of the neocons to keep the war going. So you have one day the US says we're going to stop providing arms to the Kurds. The next day they say we're going to provide arms to the Kurds. The Turkish government doesn't know which end is up, who to trust. There's an effort now to convince Erdogan of Turkey that he should drop any idea of an alliance with Russia and Iran and come back to the US.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that's going to work.
Now they're trying to court the Indians with the same way.
Absolutely, the idea of an Indo-Pacific alliance.
Yeah.
And, this is just geopolitical thinking. What do these countries have to gain from an alliance with the deep state in the United States? More casualties, more war, more chaos, and possibly a few people getting rich.
Yep.
And the other possibility is the danger of a bigger war breaking out. And then you look at what's going on with Israel. The Israelis are preparing they're preparing their population for a strike against Iran. They're already hitting Iranian locations inside Syria. And
Well, the last attempt to do that went very well with their F-16 going in flames.
Well, they're willing to lose some collateral damage to make a bigger point, which is that if they launch a bigger war, which could bring in Russia, they're expecting the United States to come in and back them. This is an old thing called the breakaway allies scenario that goes back to maybe even the 1980s. The idea that Israel on its own launches some strike, creates a problem, and then the U.S. is forced to come in and bail them out.
Yeah.
Now, this is the genius of that corrupt moron, Benjamin Netanyahu,
Jesus.
who may, in fact, end up in the very near future in prison.
I hope to God. Oh,
he's so
I hope
corrupt. So he's being investigated now by the Israeli police, and one of his former aides has flipped and is now giving testimony against him.
Yes, it was one of his closest confidants.
Yeah. Now that just makes him more dangerous because, of course, Netanyahu is in an alliance with the real Jew haters in the Middle East, which is the Saudis.
Correct.
You can't even get a passport or a visa to go into Saudi Arabia if you're Jewish.
Right.
Unless, of course, you're Israeli intelligence, in which case you get red carpet treatment because the Israelis and the Saudis are joined at the hip in terms of being allies under the umbrella of British intelligence.
When are the Jews going to figure out that Zionism is probably the most dangerous thing in the world? It's one of the most dangerous things. I don't understand. They're under. Say again, Harley?
Yeah, they should go back and read the shift that occurred in Yitzhak Rabin.
Yeah.
Who was a hardline general.
Yes.
Who was willing to suppress the Palestinians, In fact, he was initially the one suppressing the Intifada in 1990-91, and then
Right.
he suddenly realized that by treating the Palestinians as though they were non-human, it
Right.
didn't just debase the Palestinians, it debased the Israelis.
Yes, it
And
did.
his wife said that he made the comment. Leah Rabin said, Yitzhak Rabin said, we should not be like the Nazis toward the Palestinians, treat them the way the
Exactly.
Nazis treated the Jews. And
Exactly.
so he patched his relationship with Shimon Peres, sent Peres off to Oslo, or Peres's
Mhm.
advisors to Oslo, and we got out of this the Oslo Accord. And what did the right wing Israelis say about it? The hardcore
They killed him.
Zionists say we own both sides of the West Bank and the East Bank.
Hmm.
They said to Rabin, how can you talk with your enemies? And Rabin said, well, you don't have to make peace with your friends. You have to talk to your enemies.
Right.
And then they killed him.
Yep.
They
They did.
killed him.
Here's the disgusting thing about Zionism. Zionism is a concept that was born in the heart of an atheist who uttered the words "divine right of return." It's the most insane thing. And when I'm having conversation with modern day Israelis, and a few of them utter these words, I shiver. They say, "Well, it's about time we do the final solution." I'm like, "Are you a Nazi? The final solution?" And this was happening. They've dehumanized the native populations over there, and in turn, they've dehumanized themselves, Harley. Just like Yitzhak Rabin said that would happen is happening. And now they're being run into the sea, not by crazy Muslims and Arabs. They're being run into the sea by their own leadership who is willing to bring them to the brink of Masada must not fall and have the whole country annihilated. Like, I don't understand this death worship, this nihilistic death worship that we're seeing amongst the Zionists, among the neocons, amongst those that are in the Anglo-American power structure. I don't understand this mental degeneracy, Harley. I really don't.
You have to go back to the turn of the 19th century where the British took over Cairo and they
Right.
took over the Suez Canal. And they set up the Arab Bureau in Cairo.
Yes.
The whole view was that they had to grab the Middle East when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. And they
Right.
toyed with whether it should be the Hashemites from the
Jordan.
western part of the Arabian Peninsula or
Yeah.
the Saud dynasty, the Saud tribe. They eventually chose
Hmm.
the Saud tribe. They drove the
Right.
Hashemites out of Mecca and Medina and turned it over to the Sauds.
Yep. And the
Whole
Hashemites
point.
wound up in Jordan.
That's right.
Hmm.
Now, the whole point to this was what? The British saw the Middle East as a bridge between Eurasia and Africa. And in the
Yes.
thinking of Halford Mackinder, the author of the Doctrine of Geopolitics, whoever controlled the world island controlled the world. To control the world island, you had to control the heartland, which was Russia and Eastern Europe, and prevent a bridge from occurring between West and East Europe from Eurasia and Africa. So the
Hmm.
Middle East became an area where they launched tribalism, regionalism, religious warfare.
Everything.
They took an area that under the Ottomans had seen relative peace and turned it into squabbling tribes by throwing them all into these artificial countries
Yep.
where they fought. Now,
Sykes-Picot.
yeah. Now, Mackinder, geopolitics is not a science, it's not a philosophy, it's a justification of empire. It's
Yeah.
divide and conquer in the modern vernacular.
Correct.
And who are the practitioners of this today? Well, Brzezinski, Madeleine Albright, Samuel
Hmm.
Huntington,
Hmm.
and all of the neocons come out of
Hmm.
the school, which basically says human beings are animals. And the best way to keep them under control is to pit them against the other animal species in the a Darwinian jungle.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
that's where Zionism comes from. Zionism was, they credit it to Theodore Herzl. It
Yes.
actually was the British Israelites, people like Prince Albert, the oldest son of Queen Victoria,
Yes.
who founded the Palestine Exploration Fund because he said, look, we're the chosen people. We're the real Jews, the British monarchy.
Yeah.
They're psycho cultists. And they took an oppressed people of Europe, the Jewish people from the ghettos of Poland and Russia,
Yeah.
and offered them after World War II in refugee camps or they could go to the Middle East.
Yeah.
Many of the Eastern European Jews, as you know, ended up in New York or Miami Beach. I mean, LaRouche once said if a Russian Jew wanted to get sand up his ass, he'd go to Miami rather than Tel Aviv.
Oh, man, that's funny.
So they took a population that was defenseless, just as
Yeah.
they've done in with the Christian community now in Syria by
Yeah.
sending the Al Qaeda nihilists against them. You
Mhm.
take desperate populations and give them a choice, which is either whatever they choose is a bad choice.
Right.
And so then you change the religion. I mean, Judaism was changed from a universal religion to being a religion dominated by Holocaust ideology. To
Yes.
be a Jew meant you were freed from any moral restrictions in order to defend the Jewish people. And
Correct.
this is not just me speaking. These are some of the leading philosophers in Israel and the new historians in Israel who
Right.
have been trying to fight the Jabotinskyites like Netanyahu.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, Netanyahu has the connection to people like Sheldon Adelson, the Bush family, the Obama networks. So they keep Netanyahu in power. Why? Because they like. You can't like that guy. He's Meshuggah.
Yeah.
What Netanyahu's in there for is to start wars.
Yeah. Exactly correct. Exactly correct. You know, it's insane to see all these things happening, and when we look at the fact that, with Zionism, the whole Anglo-American power structure, the neoconservatives, you talk about the control of the Middle East, and isn't it ironic, Harley? Isn't it ironic that one of the linchpins to this, our old friend, may he rest in pieces, Zbigniew Brzezinski, said this about Ukraine: that Ukraine is a junction point, it is a lever to the control of Eastern Europe as well as the Middle East,
Yeah.
and the other control lever would be to the Eurasian land would be North Korea. But and that's why we're seeing all these problems both in Ukraine and the shenanigans that are also happening in North Korea.
Well, just to take a moment to develop that further,
Yeah.
from the old geopolitics like Mackinder, you talked about the heartland, then the inner crescent, which was the land bordering Eurasia, and
Yes.
then the outer crescent, which were the islands, the United Kingdom, the America, Australia, and so on. And his theory was you had to keep the heartland divided.
Yeah.
Now, Brzezinski came in and turned the inner crescent into the arc of crisis. And Brzezinski's whole strategy was to use Islamic fundamentalism against Russia and China.
Yep.
And that's how the whole in 1979, 1980. That
Yep.
was the Iranian Revolution, which the Carter administration supported by
Correct.
telling the military in Iran to stand down when Khomeini came back. So all of this is easily explained. The thing that's not easily explained is that since this has been such a damn failure, why do they continue to use the same imperial geopolitical doctrine of a unipolar world when the world is dramatically shifting and most nations no longer are choosing to be on the side of the Anglo Americans?
Yeah.
That's why we're on the verge of war. And that's, by the way, why they want to get rid of Donald Trump, because Trump said this is not the game he wants to play.
No. And that's why we have a coup against him. We have a coup against him by seditious, treasonous bastards. And Harley, do you think these people will ever be brought to justice anytime soon?
Well, I think the real issue here is you have two things going on. One is not going to stop fighting. Now, he may make compromises on certain issues, and some of them are rotten compromises, but he's not. He's doing something that no president has ever done: fighting the FBI and the CIA.
Yeah.
John Kennedy was murdered. No president has had the guts to stand up to the FBI. So if he
Right.
keeps up, the only question then is what will the American people do? And my advice to President Trump is the American people will support you if they know what the issues are.
Right.
Go on television. Don't just tweet. Go on television once a week and tell people, here's why my enemies are attacking me. It has nothing to do with a military threat or an economic threat from Russia and China. It has to do with the fact that their damn system's collapsing.
Right.
And you're
Right.
going to be
And I think
collateral
that's what.
damage of the collapse of their system
Yeah.
unless you back me up. And that's what the 2018 midterm election should be about.
It should be about that. And the whole thing also, Harley, real quick before we go, um, this whole treatment, I firmly believe that the good guys are fighting back and winning in a lot of regards against the establishment and the deep state. But one of the biggest mistakes that the Trump administration is making is treating the American public as if they're a bunch of babies. And granted, at least 40% of the population are a bunch of babies.
Yeah,
But
for Hillary.
yeah, exactly. But 60% of us, if you tell us what's going on, if you're willing to rip the Band-Aid off and rip that Band-Aid off hard and expose the public, Mr. President, expose the public to what's going on, we will come to the rescue. We will come to the rescue. We will rise up. We will put an end to this tomorrow. That's all that's needed. I don't understand what this fear. Oh, we can't tell the American people. We can't. How will they handle it? Oh my God, it'll be a breakdown of civilization. That attitude must stop.
Let me take it one step further. The other thing he has to tell the American people is that this is a foreign attack, but it's not from Russia. It's from the city of London.
Correct.
And I've written about this. I've posted these things, and if people want to get my writings on it, I'll be happy to send it out. The British hand and the whole Russiagate story. What we started, and you know this, we were talking about the Christopher Steele dossier as an example of British intervention into the election.
Correct.
Before anyone else. And now they're finally getting the point. Nunes and Getz and Trey Gowdy and others. What the president has to do is make that point. It's an Anglo-American financial system, a group of corporate cartels who think they can run the world as a banker's dictatorship. And they're the ones who invented Russiagate and used their corrupt operatives in the FBI and in the Obama administration, including John Brennan and Comey and Clapper and that poor witch Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. They were the ones who were brought into a collusion with Barack Obama to try to stop Trump or get rid of him once he was elected. Yep. He has to tell the people that. And I think most people would not only get it, but would rally to support him.
Absolutely. He has not only the bully pulpit, he also has the right and the power to basically shut down media, go on the air, and put out a national message. If he were to take his time and concisely, line by line, break it all down without interference, and he could press that button and prevent CNN or MSLSD or one of these these news broadcasting corporations from ever even commenting or interfering. He could just shut them down for the time being and spend 20 to 30 minutes, maybe an hour, detailing for the American people what the hell's going on. If they alert it as an emergency broadcast and President Trump comes on the screen and lays it out exactly what the heck's going on, the coup, how we're being sold out, the American public will come to the rescue. This is the problem. This war against the deep state is being fought as a shadow war.
Yeah.
It doesn't need to be a shadow war. The way you defeat the deep state is you shine the light of it. We are the sleeping giant. Arise us to wake.
This is what LaRouche has always insisted on.
Yeah.
This is why they threw LaRouche in prison, to shut him up, but he wouldn't be shut up. And his point has always been, name your assassins before they pull the trigger.
Exactly.
So they have to think twice about the backlash that will happen before they pull the trigger. And the president can't just do it by tweeting. I appreciate his tweets. He's making some very good points. He needs someone to help him with his grammar a little bit. But he's got the story. The real narrative is that there's British Hillary Clinton campaign, FBI, CIA collusion, not just against Trump, but against the American people.
Correct.
And it's time for the American people to be told the truth and to be rallied to support an agenda, a program that will break the power of the deep state, bring the United States into cooperation with Russia, with China. And I really think if he does that, that Europe, which is paralyzed by incompetent, immoral governments, will overthrow them and move in conjunction with the United States.
Yeah.
So it's a very bright potential moment. And Trump showed he has courage. He's just got to show he has confidence in the American people.
Mm-hmm. That's exactly correct. And stop babying the American population. It's got to stop. Because as long as this is fought in the shadows, the propensity and the potential for this to accelerate, or for something bad to happen, or an assassination, or even a thermonuclear war, that risk grows greater and greater. It's got to stop.
Yeah.
It's time for these guys in the administration, the good guys, say, hey, it's time we told the American people what's going on. Let's shine the light on the nefarious deeds of darkness. Let's shine out the light, and we would come to the rescue. Harley, I firmly believe the American public, we would lock and load. There was a great meme that I saw. My wife sent it to me, and it's a meme of an Army Ranger, I think, or a Green Beret, and he has his assault rifle, and it says, in America, when things go wrong, we don't run to other countries. We pick up our guns, we dust them off, and we go fix it. And I think that's exactly what would happen. That's exactly what happened. We would surround that swamp, and we, the people, would drain it ourselves.
And it could happen fairly quickly. Rather than going through this drip torture process, I think we've got to have a jolt right now, because the other thing is, looming in the background is a financial system which could pop at any moment.
Correct. And we got, I believe we have enough electronic duct tape, maybe at best, without any sort of severe shock. And this is barring any severe shock. Okay, any sort of massive bond dumping that could occur, because if you piss off China with all the shenanigans you're doing, Xi Jinping gets up in the morning, he hits that red F the dollar button, and he dumps those T-bonds. Barring situations like that, we have maybe another 4 or 5 years, maybe 6 years of electronic duct tape that could hold this thing together. In the meantime, it's given us enough of a respite to build a physical economy as quickly as possible to generate some sort of job. So when this whole thing does pop, we could have some sort of a wherewithal to transition to. But in our current state, we are too dilapidated to do anything if it pops right now because of some sort of systemic shock, which I think the deep state wants, Harley. If they're trying to cause a pop now, so they can blame this entire economic failure on Trump, and they will be absolutely catastrophic to the American people. That's what I'm afraid of. That's why it's better to get this thing over with as quick as possible.
A reorganization that will minimize the suffering and will actually put people back to work at living wages and build the physical economy. One thing that I think very few Americans realize is that we're lucky that Putin and Xi Jinping are relatively mature adults who are not responding to the nonsense coming at them from the deep state.
Right. We're very, very lucky. Like, every day I thank you, God, that Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping are not irrational idiots. And that's why whenever we have a report on what China and Russia is doing, when me and CJ talk, whenever we have a report to report on, we always say, meanwhile in the land of adults. That's how I always preface my reports about Russia and China. Meanwhile in the land of adults.
Yeah.
Unreal. Harley, give out your closing comments. Go for it.
If people would like, please send me an email, and I will send you my 2 most recent articles on the British hand and the what the Mueller indictment is all about, because that was a total, complete fraud timed to occur with the Munich Security Conference. Mm-hmm. So send me an email to harleysch@gmail.com, and I'll be happy to send you these 2 reports. So it's harleysch@gmail.com.
Fantastic. Harley Schlanger, thank you so much for spending time with us. It's been a great time. Thank you for all the information. And folks, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this with your friends and family, and also check out the interview that Harley did with our friend Sean over at SGT Report. And with that being said, we're over and out. Enjoy your week. Take it away, CJ.